Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 194, recording on Thursday afternoon, August 27th, a few days out from roster cutdown. So we are in the thick of it here covering the Minnesota Vikings, which I do every day for The Athletic. And we've got this show that we do 2 times every week. If you're new here and watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or iHeart, you can follow us, give us 5 stars, give us a rating, and all that stuff helps us out. Usually we do the Q&A episode of the show early in the week, but I hosted the program, Dan Barrera's show on KFAN on Tuesday afternoon, and after 3.5 hours of talking, I think I lost my entire voice and needed to nap for about 15 hours. So we are here on this Thursday afternoon talking Minnesota Vikings football. Going to take you guys questions. You wanted to know about the quarterbacks, obviously, which we'll get into, the edge rusher position, the 53-man roster, some of the dynamics of the run game. Let's see what else we got. We've got potential extension candidates down the line. So a lot to get to over the course of this show. Before we hop right in, I do want to mention our giveaway for episode 200. So we're at 194. For episode 200, we're going to do what we did last year for episode 100, and that's do a giveaway where just a gratitude from the show to you guys, the avid listeners. What do you get? You get a Jersey Mike's gift card because we are big fans of Jersey Mike's here on the show. You get a Alec Lewis Show coffee mug like the one right behind me if I know how to point. And you get an Unreal limited edition Vikings hoodie that they released last year, potentially more, so we'll see about that. But wanted to announce that here on the show. All you got to do is follow us on Instagram at Alec Lewis Show, and then tag someone who also you think would be interested in the giveaway in the comments section of that Instagram post. So, all right, here we go. Without further ado, going to get directly to you guys' questions. And the first one comes from an avid listener. His name is Carl Johnson. And Carl had an interesting one. He said, reading your 53-man roster projection and the phrase in the quarterback section, expect the Vikings to play more from the shotgun in 2026, led me to a follow-up question. How does that impact the running backs? Does Jordan Mason versus Aaron Jones versus Damon Claiborne run better from the shotgun compared with under center? So thought that was an interesting question. I did write that for a reason. I do expect the Vikings passing game or just their offense in general, I should say, to play more from the gun/pistol in 2026. I'm really curious to see how that goes from a timing perspective with the passing concepts. But to the question of how it affects and impacts the running backs, I pulled up these numbers just overall in 2025. So shotgun runs in 2025 in the NFL had a 4.4 yards per carry average. That was higher than an under center run yards per carry average, which was 4.2 yards per carry. That was pretty interesting to me. The success rate on runs was significantly higher from under center, 41.5% versus 39.4%. And then explosive runs were also more likely under center. So look, some of that has to do with the timing of where the running backs hit, of how they angle once they receive the ball. So it's just traditionally, there's been so much transition, I'd say, throughout the NFL over the last few years of under center, marrying it with the play action pass. The Vikings, in some ways, are, I would say, going against the grain in a capacity with potentially shifting more to the shotgun. Now, that is a shift to adapt to personnel, which should be, I think, complimented. And I also think there are teams, specifically the Miami Dolphins, that have run the football effectively from the gun or from pistol. So it makes sense that Frank Smith, the assistant head coach, would bring some of that philosophy over to the Minnesota Vikings in 2026 with their offense. As far as the specific running back, Carl, to get to your initial question, I would say Aaron Jones, with the exposure to what Green Bay has done with some of their pistol run game, shotgun run game, some of the motions that they use to produce some eye candy before the snap. Like Aaron Jones will have some exposure to that with kind of how things were incorporated in Green Bay. Damon Claiborne coming from college in a very RPO style shotgun system at Wake Forest, like he'll have some experience. Jordan Mason, probably not as much recently, just considering he's been here. He was in San Francisco. That's a very under center style run game, but I'd say in the end for me, like the rushing effectiveness in 2026 is going to be much more about the offensive line's production, the offensive line's ability to create a push off the ball, and just their effectiveness in sorting out what they get defensively than really, the running back comfort in the specific type of formation that the Vikings are running. That's just my opinion, so we'll see how that plays out. But hopefully that gives you some perspective, Carl, on that subject in general. The next question comes from Brian Vossen, who said, outside of the third edge rusher position, free agency being of key interest to Brian, do I see any last minute extensions before the season starts, or is that a window that's likely closed? It's never closed. I would say these conversations can happen for players right in the lead up to the season. I go back to what year was it? Probably going into either 23 or 24, the year that Justin Jefferson was not extended. I believe in his third year, there were conversations right in the lead up, and then it didn't end up happening, which was okay because those deals are really hard to consummate because of the amount of money that you're dealing with in the future and how to kind of maneuver all of that money around. So it can happen for certain guys. It can be more of a rarity. I would say the player that is most interesting to me within this conversation, like, yes, Jordan Addison's one that's going to come up, but for me, it's probably Blake Cashman, who you mentioned, Brian, in the question. Blake Cashman's a fascinating situation in that his contract's supposed to void after the 2026 season. He's had just an absolutely phenomenal camp, has participated in every single first team rep, he's not missed a snap from my recollection throughout this training camp, was so good in joint practices against the Ravens, has been critical in terms of helping the back end with a lot of the youth that's mixed in, communicate defensively. And then he's going to be huge from a lever that you can pull from a pass rush standpoint. He's huge from a run defense standpoint and understanding where to be from a gap perspective. And then the physicality and I'd say just the range in the passing game stands out with Blake Cashman too. So he's 30 years old. He's from the Minneapolis, from Eden Prairie. He's played the last 3 years, 13 games, 14 games, 13 games. Like, people bring up missed time. And while, yes, that those numbers prove that he has missed pockets of games in recent years, he has played at least 13 games in all 3 years of his Vikings tenure. So, and then there's really no obvious like middle linebacker successor. Yes, the team has Jake Golday, who they drafted in the second round, and Jake has had a really good camp. I thought probably more under the radar than some of the other rookies, just because maybe he had a really good spring, so there was less probably just attention around it. But I thought Jake Golday's looked pretty good, but he can also line up on the edge. So is his best role going to be the Blake Cashman role? I think that remains kind of a question. So when, considering that Blake Cashman's contract is scheduled to void after 2026, and players, especially at that age, like, how often do they tend to play out the last year of their deal? And also knowing that Blake is from here, he's loved being a Minnesota Vikings. That's one that I wonder. I mean, the number for him, I believe he's owed $7.5 million in cash for 2026. That's very middle of the pack from a linebacker perspective. Like, for a comparison, Alex Anzalone, who is 31, and I think you'd probably get a very fair argument that Blake Cashman is a more impactful player, is owed $9 million in cash in 2026 and was most recently signed by the Tampa Bay Bucks. Jack Campbell, who's much younger, but was extended by the Detroit Lions, he's owed about $9.7 million in cash. So could you, for Blake Cashman, could you go into next year, guarantee something in 2027, and then leave it open in 2028 without having a very obvious successor? I mean, I think that would be kind of a sensible move. obviously you're dealing with the injury component of it all, but he would be the name, Brian, that just stands in my mind when you ask that question. But it's a good question. It'll be interesting to see what happens or what doesn't. Timothy Root asks, who's going to play edge rusher if Dallas Turner and Andrew Van Ginkel, get hurt or tired? Great question, Timothy. It's been, it's something that I've asked. I asked Kevin O'Connell that this past week, just how do you feel about the edge rusher depth? And his immediate kind of response goes to Tyler Batty, the undrafted player from last year who signed out of BYU, played a lot of special teams. Definitely, they've loved him internally from a work habit standpoint, from a commitment and schematic probably comprehension perspective. But it would be asking a lot at the pass rush position in Brian Flores' defense if Dallas Turner were to suffer an injury to have to turn it right over to Tyler Batty. I mean, maybe you untap something that can happen with some of these undrafted players, but I maintain that finding a free agent who first and foremost is willing to back up Dallas Turner and be that type of role and sign with an understanding of that type of role, but then also someone who's been productive in the past and hasn't fully lost his entire, their entire ability to thrive. Like, I do think that is a sensible way to use the Vikings $22 million in cap space that they currently have. Now, you guys are probably sitting there, okay, Alec, so who are the names that I should keep eyes on? I mean, there aren't that many available free agents who are just chomping at the bit, or it's very clear and obvious that they are no-brainer signings for guys who want to be backups. The ones that are pretty clear-cut, where does Kyle Van Noy stand with where he's at in his career and his relationship with Brian Flores? They obviously spent time together in Miami. That would be a question for me. Leonard Floyd, from he was most recently last year played with Atlanta. I thought he was mildly productive on film and would definitely serve the purpose of what this role could or should be. And then there's Hassan Reddick, who, that's been a topsy-turvy ride for him, going from, I believe he was in Philly, then he goes to New York, then he didn't play a lot, then he goes to Tampa, was active, some injury, so you might be dealing with a little more there. So, no, it's a very fair question. I think, Timothy, you're more likely to see one of the current rostered players fill in if Andrew Van Ginkel suffered an injury. And I'm talking about a Chaz Chambliss, who is an undrafted versatile player. I'm talking about Jake Golday, who we just discussed. Like, that would be, for me, a more likely probably like roadmap or path for someone who's currently on the roster, would be that edge rusher spot where you're kind of sometimes in kind of you're lined up in the alley away from the line of scrimmage. And sometimes you're lined up over the slot defender, but you're just playing an underneath zone. Then sometimes you're rushing the passer. Like, that is a very curated role that to think you're just going to find someone in free agency to step in to fill that, I think would be harder than the Dallas Turner spot, which was the Jonathan Grenard spot, where you're setting edges, you're rushing the passer, you're winning in one-on-one when that opportunity presents itself. So I will say, bringing it up allows us to talk a little bit more about Dallas Turner. And I wrote about it last week after joint practices, after the Thursday. But again, all of the attentiveness and conversation, rightfully so, on the quarterbacks has probably prevented more ink to be dried on other players in areas like Dallas Turner. And so, he looked really, really good in those joint practices. And I said this on the radio and I've said it in writing, more than, it looked really impressive. And that's really important when you're going up against Ronnie Stanley, who for his age, regardless, has been a two-time Pro Bowler in the NFL and an all-pro player, like a very veteran experienced tackle. That tells you a lot. But sometimes for me, what even is more revealing is, okay, after those joint practices, I'm standing over near the facility, the players are walking off the field, and as you can imagine, I've stood in the locker room every day now for 4 years. I've got to know so many of these guys at a deeper level, and you can kind of discern with certain players, okay, how legitimate is what I just saw, and you have some of those conversations. And I would just say the reaction from teammates who know what it takes at a level that I never will, and I'm very open and honest in admitting that, there's only so much I see and I can understand and ascertain. Like their reactions told me, as much as anything. And so I think that we'll see what Dallas Turner can provide and produce in 2026. But if he does really stand out and give this defense more flexibility than they have, I mean, that's the other thing is Jonathan Grenard, at times, yes, Brian Flores did drop him to maintain some of the deception up front. But I think Dallas Turner dropping, I remember years ago, he had an interception in Seattle dropping off the line of scrimmage. And so if he is even dynamic in that role as well, and then offenses have to guard against, from a protection standpoint, who's coming, who's dropping. Could Andrew Van Ginkel now come more than he used to? Could Dallas Turner drop more than Jonathan Grenard used to? Like, that just adds another tool in Brian Flores and the defensive staff's toolbox when they're calling plays on Sunday. So really will be fun to just go on the journey of evaluating and watching Dallas Turner throughout 2026. Before we continue with questions, and there are a lot more to get to, I promise. I mentioned quarterbacks. I mentioned some 53-man stuff. Someone wanted me to predict the schedule at this point, and I'm going to take a crack at it because why not? I want to talk about our presenting sponsor, and that's First Resource Bank, a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area, run by phenomenal people. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. They are from the area. They are connectors with the Minneapolis community, and they're huge Vikings fans. I mean, I saw Tim last week at Canterbury Park where I was hanging out, and he's pumped for the season, very excited to be at US Bank Stadium for week 1 of the Vikings season against the Green Bay Packers. So you want to be banking with people who want to talk about the things that you guys are very passionate about. You can do that at First Resource Bank. That's just kind of the side part of it all. They have a phenomenal online banking platform. They've got branches all over the Minneapolis area, and there are really great people in those branches who will help you with anything you need, cashier's check. That's something I needed, and they made it really easy for me. So please check out First Resource Bank in the description below. Their website's there with some information on their branches and locations. I also want to talk about Pro MN Athletics. So this has been an awesome partnership for us here on the Alec Lewis Show, but I love the game of football so much. You can see it with some of the books that I'm reading or I've read behind me. Like, it's what I'm so curious to learn about this stuff. And so when I can, and I also think it's fun to talk about this game in a fun and enjoyable way. And so when I get to partner with people like Kurt Graham and Tanner, who started Pro MN Athletics, because they're like, how can we make youth football development better in the Minneapolis and Minnesota area and region? Like, that's pretty cool for me. So these three guys, that was really their intent and their vision behind Pro MN. And so they've structured academies throughout the spring, summer, and winter. They've had 7-on-7 leagues this summer with a bunch of the local high schools. Tanner is Tanner Morgan, the former Gophers quarterback, who is really savvy from a quarterback mechanic standpoint and is training some of the best high school quarterbacks in the state. So I would just say, if your son plays football, if you have friends whose kids play football and they want to play in middle school, in high school, in college, and they want to, learn from people who have walked in those paths, who are really committed to helping the youth in this region, I just can't say enough about Pro MN, and their information is also in the description for you guys to check out and get in contact with them. And if you have any questions about it, please send them my way. I am more than willing to provide more information and connect you guys directly via my email, which is also in the description. All right, back to your Vikings questions. All right, Suits Bear, Mac is his name, longtime listener, we appreciate it, asks, what does success look like for the 2026 Vikings? I received this question, and it didn't take me long to really think about an answer. I think the success for 2026, considering the short-term perspective that this, the organization has taken into this season, is make the playoffs and win a playoff game. I think that would at least provide a level of belief, optimism, or just confidence in where the trajectory lies. I think if you miss the playoffs, there are going to be questions for a lot of people and a lot of dynamics. I think if you make the playoffs and don't win a playoff game, that hurdle will remain something that has to be climbed, and the pressure will heighten on that. So I just think making the playoffs and winning a playoff game would show positive growth. I don't think by any means it's going to be easy. I also don't think, it's tough with a first-year quarterback, in a system to just hop in and do that. But, there's also a reason that this quarterback circumstance is what it is. So it's hard to segment that out. And I would just say, when you haven't won a playoff game since 2019, and that's ownership's expectation every single year, when Justin Jefferson is 27 years old in the heart of his prime, coming off the season that was last year, when Kevin O'Connell as the head coach is in his fifth season, as the Vikings head coach without a playoff win, like that just feels like an understandable standard. Like, it's been so interesting for me. I've talked about this on the podcast in the past. Like when I cover Major League Baseball, so you guys maybe have heard this, but like when I covered Major League Baseball, you could go 5 years in a rebuilding cycle because draft hits were, you needed time for them to rise through the minor leagues. And that was like a 3-year kind of time horizon. And then it was go time from there. But in the NFL, especially when an ownership group is like the Vikings ownership group, and they are committed to the very, the week to week of it all and the year to year nature of it all, I just think that kind of has to be the expectation. And then, at some point, and you guys are probably, it's probably abundantly obvious to you, but like the expectation needs to be higher than that too, not just making the playoffs and winning a game. I mean, for an organization that hasn't reached the mountaintop, I just don't think if success doesn't feel like that mountaintop, which right now I don't know like how you could expect that to be the benchmark right now, then it has to get there. That's just kind of the truth of it all. I like this question. This was from Max at _FF_fanatic. What perceptions did you have of the offense going to camp that have changed coming out of it? I don't really necessarily know if I had a ton of perceptions that have changed. Like from the very outset of sitting with Kevin O'Connell at the NFL scouting combine, like he made it very clear that they were overhauling some of their run foundation of what they want to do in the run game. So I expected that. I expected with Keith Carter as the offensive line coach, the standard and the intensity of that room would rise, and you would see that on the practice field. I would say I expected the receiving core to be really dynamic. I expected the trials and errors of Kyler Murray's adaptation to the scheme that the Vikings are building for 2026. I expected that to include some positives and some negatives. I mean, maybe, as I thought through this answer, if anything, I would say just, my perception was like this offensive line really has to prove it. And I still think that's very much the case, but just the fact that the personnel there's been as much continuity with the offensive line personnel and as much just commitment, it feels like every single day from all five guys. And that I'm talking from left to right: Christian Darrisaw, Donovan Jackson, Blake Brandel, Will Fries, Brian O'Neill. Like for that group to enter the way they did, and probably for me to just want to evaluate what it looks like, and them to arrive at the place that they have, where I do think you can be optimistic about what that group can be capable of in 2026. That for me is maybe the most notable kind of component from a perception standpoint of kind of how how we started and how it went. Let's see here. Next question comes from Multiple Hats. Dallas Turner has gotten positive buzz throughout this preseason, but I haven't seen much insight into how and why. Has his pass rush move set diversified, improved? Is he setting the edge better? Speed to power looking more starting caliber? How is he evolving? Yeah, that's a great question. I do think, just to work backwards, yes, I do think speed to power is something that does feel like it's taken a step. I can recall a couple reps with Ronnie Stanley where Dallas Turner, who thrived with his long arm in college and working his way underneath the pads of college offensive lineman. That was something that I think gave the Vikings optimism when they first drafted him. But it did feel like going up against Ronnie Stanley that he was able to bull rush him with an amount of force that did make Ronnie Stanley have to think about that as a possibility every snap. And when you do that, and offensive linemen now have another thought in your head in their head, as opposed to this guy's just going to rip around the edge, I do think it makes it more likely for Dallas Turner to thrive with that bread and butter in some way. So I would say that's part of it. I would say just a discipline of how he's going about it every day. That feels like a not that he was never undisciplined or not that he was never unmotivated, because those were never things that I've ever heard internally regarding Dallas Turner. It just feels like I think the opportunity for him with Jonathan Grenard not here anymore and Dallas having the starting, spot, I just probably amplified what's possible or what in his mind he felt like he needed to do with their responsibility heading into 2026. And then I also don't think you can overstate it's his third year in the system that is a very conceptually based system that is not taught similar to how some of the college programs teach. And so it can take time. And when there's an amount of overload, it can slow down players who are like Dallas Turner, where they are explosive and athletic freaks. And so, I think the combination of all of that is probably why you've seen the buzz and heard the buzz of Dallas Turner, as opposed to any one finite element. But I'd still say this, like, I'm very much looking forward to, okay, you get to week 3 and it's Tampa Bay and they've got very experienced, savvy tackles. And can Dallas Turner put together the pass rush profile or the pass rush tool bag to find his way around some of those, very savvy, very technically sound tackles? I think that will be another hurdle for him, but I'm really looking forward to watching it. Next question comes from Isaac Hilzendager. Do you see both Jacoby and Jacob Thomas making the 53? Yes. What is your top 3 for Mr. Mankato as training camp is ending? So if you missed it, I wrote an extensive piece on Jacob Thomas, the undrafted free agent from James Madison at The Athletic on Thursday. Poured some time into that one, talked to a bunch of his former coaches. Like, I hope people know I hope people read the story at The Athletic first and foremost, because it's where I do my day job. But I also hope people celebrate the story a little bit. I mean, here's a guy who was Ty Felton's high school teammate at Stonebridge in Virginia, who played a ton of positions in high school. He played safety, he played receiver, he played quarterback. Originally, he committed to Richmond to play quarterback. Then, miscommunications with the Richmond staff, he decommits. Curt Cignetti, who was then the James Madison coach, unheralded at the time, he slides into Jacob Thomas's DMs, and he wants Jacob Thomas to walk on as a quarterback. So Jacob Thomas steps into James Madison. Eventually, they move him to safety. He gets some special team snaps. Then he transitions and plays a little defense. Then Curt Cignetti leaves. Without Jacob Thomas being on scholarship. Bob Chesney, a very high-profile coach who's now at UCLA, comes in. He offers Jacob the scholarship. Jacob stays to be around family, to establish a legacy at James Madison. And he's phenomenal in 2024 and 25. And the coaches in that building were telling scouts, please draft this guy. You're not going to regret it. He's the best player in the Sun Belt. Well, he goes undrafted. The Vikings had a scout, Michelle Mankoff, that was on it from the outset, working with the coaching staff. They ended up, I believe one of the DB's coaches, Chinzo Finari, absolutely loved Jacob Thomas as well. Same with Gerald Alexander. And then, the Vikings end up recruiting him. He finds his way to rookie minicamp. He finds his way to training camp, and he's just continued to impress from an aptitude perspective, from an athleticism perspective, and it's a damn cool story. So to answer the question, Isaac, he is Mr. Mankato, absolutely. I do think, Jake Golday, like I said, has gone a little bit under the radar. I think some might vouch for Chuck Demings, of course, with how he impressed really early on in training camp. And then Dominique Orange has flown a little bit under the radar from a rookie's perspective of just like, I've been blown away on some of the tape of how athletic he looks and rangy in the backfield. And for a guy his size, I think that inspires really good optimism for the depth at nose tackle behind Levi Drake Rodriguez. So that's what I'd say. But I hope that's kind of the tidbit of the Jacob Thomas arc and journey. But I really think it's a very cool one. I mean, his parents really just pushed him to pursue the dream. His father is a special agent at the Pentagon who worked an extra 16 hours every Saturday to be able to cover the college expenses for Jacob at James Madison. So just a damn cool story. One of those that, like, you know, for you guys who listen to this and who know me really well, it's much more that type of stuff that I enjoy doing than the day-to-day, you know, quarterback attentiveness probably. And that's just, you know, it's part of the job. You do everything you got to do. But when I get to pursue one of those stories, and there will be more over the next 2 weeks, I do not take it for granted, and I give everything I absolutely have. So please go check that out at The Athletic. So Kay Delisle, who is another longtime listener, asks, since training camp is essentially over, can I pick the schedule? So I haven't even looked at the schedule in a long time. So we're going to do this. I didn't prepare this. I'm just going to go based on vibes. And then however many we get to at the end, we'll get there, and hopefully it doesn't get aggregated. Week 1 at home against the Packers. I'm going to say the Vikings win that game, 1-0. Week 2 at Chicago. I'm going to say at Chicago, no loss, 1-1. Week 3 at Tampa. I could probably go either way with that. I'll say at Tampa, you give them, they're probably like a 2-point favorite in the game. It's a complete coin flip. I'll say loss, 1-2. Week 4 versus Miami, that'll be a win, 2-2. Week 5 at New Orleans, I'll say win, 3-2. Week 7 versus the Colts, close to a toss-up. I will say, what are we at? We're at 3-2 right now. I'll say the Colts at home, that'll be a win, 4-2. Week 8 at Detroit, that'll be a loss, 4-3. Week 9 at home versus the Bills, loss, 4-4. Week 10 at Green Bay, I'll say loss, split Green Bay, 4-5. Week 11 at home against the 49ers. Vikings tend to have success at home against the 49ers. I'll say win, 5-5. Week 12 versus the Falcons, win without question, 6-5. Week 13 versus the Panthers, let's say win, 7-5. Week 14 at New England on a Thursday night, let's say loss, 7-6. Week 15 at home versus the Detroit Lions, I'll say loss, 7-7. Week 16 versus the Commanders, win, 8-7. Week 17 at New York Jets, let's say win, 9-7. Week 18 versus the Bears, I'll say split with the Bears, 10-7. So yeah, that 10-7, that feels fair. I think it's probably generous in some places, but yeah, I don't know about others. Before we answer a few more, and then we'll hop out of here for episode 194, I do want to get to 2 more of our sponsors. First and foremost, Aquarius Home Services. At Aquarius Home Services, your independent, authorized Connecticut water systems dealer, they know that managing a household and all of the expenses that come with it is no easy task. They also know how important having worry-free water in your home is. Your family deserves water you can trust. Use it every day for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and bathing. That's why they are excited to share their summer trade-in and trade-up program. Trade in your old water softener, trade up to a Connecticut whole home water treatment system. The best part, you can get an additional $500 off on top of their summer sale prices. Say goodbye to hard water, rust stains, and unwanted contaminants, and hello to cleaner, worry-free water flowing through every faucet all day, every day. It all starts with the free water test, scheduled today at AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. Also want to shout out our friends at Great Clips. If you've got kids, you know that back to school season is a lot. Supply list, shoe shopping, juggling all the schedules. It's not exactly a magical time of year. The Great Clips app, though, that really does work like magic. With just a few taps, You can find a salon nearby, see the wait time, and check in when it works for you. You can even get a message when it's your turn, so you know when to pack up the kids and head over. Oh, and the savings. That's where the real magic happens. So when it's time for back to school haircuts, download the Great Clips app. It may not take care of all your back to school to-dos, but it'll definitely make some of that stress disappear. Great Clips, it's going to be great. All right. Some final Vikings questions for you. And then, we will say sayonara until Friday night's preseason game. And then this weekend, we'll be back Sunday night, I will tell you, to talk about the roster and where things stand. If anything else happens and anything requires an emergency, we might be back as well for that. Let's see here. I'll go rapid fire with some of these. Taylor, how's the O-line depth? Are you comfortable with Huber, Juergens, Lee, or Rouse, or is this something to watch on cutdown day? It's definitely something to watch. And no, I'd say if the Vikings are having to dip into that offensive line depth, it's going to require a lot of work for the Vikings offensive staff to supplement some of those holes. And when you're working with a quarterback who needs the interior to be pretty solid and firm, for him to stand in there and see the field the way he needs to, like, I think you're banking a lot on the health of that offensive line. But you could say that probably in every building. If you have injuries on the offensive line, it's going to be very, very tough. John Henry, now that Kyler's been the starter for a couple weeks, how different has the offense looks? More throws to the outside? Yes. More pistol gun? Yes. Less under center? Yes. What should my excitement level be for the offense? Because right now I see the ceiling being top 5. If the Vikings have a top 5 offense, you guys, and probably me as well, just covering it, it's going to be quite the entertaining run here. I would say, it's difficult because they're doing a lot. You see a lot of different types of keeper movements. You see a lot of different types of schematics. And so I said this on the Athletic Football Show with Robert Mays last week or 2 weeks ago. Like, my question as much as anything else is, how do you take all of the strengths of what fits the system from the past, what fits some of the personnel that's currently here, including Kyler Murray, and how do you meld it all together in a clarified, identified, concise type of scheme and structure? Like, I think that's the charge for the Vikings offensive staff. And if they do that effectively, boy, again, it's going to be a very fun fall. And I do think it's worth having high expectations, but I still can't get out of my mind the importance of and the essential nature of the run game and just what it's going to mean for Kyler Murray, for the defense, for everything in 2026. Let's see. Purple Nurple, is there enough trust in Damon Claiborne to get him some carries without injuries? I just think the explosiveness at some point might be too much to where he pushes the door down on that. So we'll find out. But yeah, I mean, the guy, when you watch him in person, he just is absolutely explosive. Let's see. Luke Garrison, who gets the short straw on the roster if Harrison Smith decides to come back in the next week or two? Yeah, I mean, the Harrison Smith thing, from my understanding, is still undecided. And so if he were to come back and steps right in, then yeah, it's probably Theo Jackson you're talking about. It's potentially Jay Ward. I mean, maybe even Jacob Thomas, who we talked about extensively. But if it's a rookie like a Jacob Thomas, the opportunity to spend a year learning from Harrison Smith, watch him go about it every day, like, I think the exponential effect that would have in the long term outweighs any of the probably short term gut punch of not being out there. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say. Let's see. Eric Hansen, apologize if you've covered this previously, but after a few weeks watching the entire team, where do you think this draft class could rank all time in franchise history? Considering that I haven't experienced all draft classes in Vikings franchise history, that one's tough. I would say just the extent of the entire draft class and the potential talent of it, I think from my time covering the team going back to 2022, which probably doesn't say a ton for you guys, but it feels like it has the highest potential and maybe even highest floor outcome of what's possible in the draft classes that I've covered. let's see. Steve asks, he references a report on the Vikings questioning the selection of Caleb Banks. I would just say it's for me personally, like it's just way too early to question a draft pick. Now, I would say this. I've been very open on the podcast and in writing of the hurdles that Caleb Banks is going to have to climb on the field to produce at a level that fits his draft profile. But as we've seen with Dallas Turner, like a lot can change in 2 years. And I'm one who've learned a lot in my time covering the league of like growth happens in a lot of different ways and it's not linear for a lot of different guys. And so I just don't want to come out crazy on Caleb Banks through 2 preseason games and a bunch of practices. But you need to see the commitment level. You need to see the improvement quickly, the doggedness and just like the violence and all of that stuff from a down-to-down, snap-to-snap basis. And I think, until you see that consistently, it lends itself, I think, to the Caleb Banks conversation being present regardless. I haven't really done the quarterback thing, so we should probably end with that. Ron Rubin asks, don't have a question. Or he says, I said he asks. He does not ask. He says, don't have a question, but as a Vikings fan since the Super Bowl days, extremely disappointed at J.J. McCarthy's progress. This is far from putting all the blame solely on J.J. Yeah, I mean, I've been asked about like the blame and all of this countless times on the radio and elsewhere. And yeah, I mean, look, I would say it's a complicated, nuanced, complex circumstance. I mean, when the Vikings drafted J.J. McCarthy as the 5th quarterback taken in the 2024 draft, they knew at the time that he required development from a mechanical standpoint, from a just growth perspective, and, the belief in themselves that they could get that development and bring that out was obviously, I'd say early on until the joint practices in Cleveland where Kevin O'Connell announced that J.J. McCarthy had torn his meniscus. Like, I think you saw progress. And then the torn meniscus happens. And it really, from that point forward, it just felt covering it on the outside like it's been an uphill battle from that point forward. And so I can understand, like, I think it's very open. It's very just right for me to be like, I can understand those of you like Ron, who are disappointed or who are wanted more or who are trying to figure out or rationalize in your mind, how did this national championship winning quarterback for Michigan enter the NFL with an environment that was as heralded as it's been, and it go the way it's gone now for 2+ years. Like, I can understand the psychology of trying to rationalize what has happened. How did this play out? Who's at fault? I get all of that. And I would say this, if you think there is a direct answer to any of those questions, that it is one person, that it is one subject, that it is one thing, I think you're avoiding. I think you're avoiding the nuanced nature of this entire journey. That at some point, we'll try to be as in depth as I possibly can on. And I think you're also just avoiding the truth of the matter that when you draft a quarterback, even in the first round, they typically come with a 40% hit rate, which means a 60% miss rate. And so, regardless of who you're taking or the optics around it or the environment you have, I just think you're throwing darts. You're making educated bets. And when you do that, there is a probability, because life comes with probabilities oftentimes, that they don't work out. And so dealing with that as fans and navigating the psychology, I can understand all of the perspective. But it's been pretty clear cut through the first 2 preseason games. Like the inability to apply touch consistently has been a constant theme. The kind of erratic nature in the pocket in certain instances, like that's been a theme. The inaccuracies at some point, that's been a theme. Now, another theme has been not great pass protection. Like on Saturday this past week, the left tackle was Henry Bird, who had barely played left tackle, and he struggled mightily against Mike Green and Zion Young. So did that position JJ McCarthy in the most optimal way? I don't know if I necessarily think so. So again, you can talk about one subject, and if you do, and in my role, it's hard, and especially on a podcast like this, like it's hard because to have the context and nuance required to get at this in the most objective, facts, real, in-depth way, it's hard to do on a podcast. And so, but I also have to do the podcast. That's just what we do, and I have to write every day. So I'm trying to be as open and honest and real about it all as possible. But yeah, I mean, for where it stands right now, just to wrap this up, like, we'll see if JJ McCarthy plays Friday night. It's been an interesting week from the injury perspective. And then we'll see from there how it looks from a depth chart perspective. It's just going to be my understanding and my expectation that Carson Wentz, with what he's shown in the preseason and the fact that he signed back here for backup level money at $3 million, and then the conversations that I've had, that he would push himself into a spot where in a pinch, if needed, in a season where the Vikings cannot afford a disaster, that he would be the most trusted, reliable option if Kyler Murray were to suffer an injury. So I'll end it there, and then we'll be back Sunday night, like I said, after the roster kind of gets finalized and fleshed out a little bit. I'll also have a roster projection after Friday night's game. We'll do a final version of that based on some stuff that I've gathered. And then, we will move forward from there. Please check out the giveaway on Instagram at Alec Lewis Show. Follow us over there and comment with someone you know to be included in that. Check out First Resource Bank, ProMN, Great Clips, Aquarius Home Services, and check out the Jacobs Thomas story at The Athletic. With that, that'll do it for episode 194 of the Alec Lewis Show, and I cannot wait to talk to you guys very, very soon.